Welcome back to the International Classroom Podcast, the show that explores one big idea. A classroom can be anywhere and learning can happen everywhere. I'm Alex Gray, and today's episode is a brilliant example of that, because my guest isn't just working in education, he's living performance, leadership, and learning in two worlds at once. I'm joined by Harry Titley, a secondary school teacher, head of year, and director of rugby at Burton Rugby Club, speaking to us from Burton-on-Trent. Now, Harry and I go back a little bit through rugby, but what stood out instantly in this conversation wasn't the titles, it was the purpose. Now, Harry describes his work in one simple mission: helping people grow and unlocking their potential, whether that's a teenager in a corridor or a rugby player under pressure on a Saturday afternoon. We dig into the crossover between teaching and coaching, what great environments have in common, and why psychological safety matters more than ever, and how high expectations can still be delivered with humanity. Harry shares the practical tools he uses to develop players, including a brilliant performance pad idea that feels like assessment for learning, but for sport. And we also talk about the realities, the relentlessness of the job, the mental load you take home, the difficulty of selection conversations, and why the best leaders don't just chase results, they build cultures people want to belong to. So if you care about learning, leadership, and performance in schools, sport, business, or life, this one will give you plenty to reflect on. Let's get into it. Harry, welcome to the International Classroom Podcast. Whereabouts in the world do we find you today?
I'm in Burton-on-Trent.
That wonderful place, a wonderful place. There is a connection between us because obviously during my period of time when I was playing rugby and coaching as well, we crossed over a little bit, and I was scratching my head back to when probably the first time I came across you was. And I think I got it down to staff's under 20s. I think that was the first time coaching wise. There was me and Craig, who I believe you've got over at Burton now, haven't you?
Craig Wilson.
Yeah.
Okay, I'll mention that to him this morning when I see him.
Yeah, and that's going back some time. But before we kind of start talking about the current titles that you have, so from a sports perspective and the educational perspective, how would you describe what you do in one sentence when no one else is watching?
Busy. That would be it. It is busy, but I like to be busy. And a lot of people say, how do you manage to balance it all out? And you just seem to be on the go all the time. But I think when you're enjoying what you're doing, it's easier. And it is quite relentless. But for me, it's about trying to help people grow and unlocking their potential. I think back to my first experiences of coaching and teaching, and you get a buzz from watching people start to grow and that long-term development for them. So everything that I do with regards to coaching at the rugby club or teaching in a school, it's giving people the tools to unlock their potential and improve as a person as well as a student or a rugby player.
So just to give some context for people listening into this, so you are by profession as well, a teacher, and you teach locally. How you manage that? Because we talked about roles and you talk about being busy. You've got director of rugby and you're jumping on this morning before travelling off to Huddersfield for a game. Mm. And then you're also head of year, I think, from what I can gather from my research. How does that fit in? They
intertwine quite nicely, and I think a lot of the skills are transferable from the job that I do at a secondary school to being at the rugby club. And I think the main thing for me is being a people's person and connecting with people and being a good listener and building relationships with people. That's massive for me, and we'll probably touch on it in a small time.
And I'm sorry, I'm interjecting. I was interested. Obviously, you talked about connecting people, you talk about developing people. And obviously, you were a player yourself. Was there a time when you realized, or was there a moment that stood out to you that kind of made you think, you know what, I'm really interested in developing people more than what I am in probably playing the sport?
Yeah, so when my earliest memory was my dad used to coach one of the age groups at Burton Rugby Club as well. My brother's 2 years younger than me. We used to train at Shobnall Leisure Complex, you'll probably remember. A rugby field in the middle of a athletics track with shot put holes in the floor, and there's nowhere to hide if it was raining. It was brilliant, good memories. I remember my dad asking me to go down and help out, do some coaching, and I must have been 14, 15, and my dad's a forward, and I think a lot of his coaches were forwards, and he just needed someone to go along with the backs. And looking back, and I'm giving myself a compliment here, really, but I seem to remember I enjoyed it. I enjoyed the buzz of having some feedback off the players about their enjoyment. I enjoyed the feedback off my dad a few weeks later to saying that things are starting to work and there's progress. But I look back and I also found it wasn't like I was in my comfort zone, but I do remember it wasn't the case of me with a whistle setting up an activity, saying off you go, and then just standing back and watching it unfold. I kind of naturally went into having conversations with people and questioning the players and trying to prize out some answers from them. And I just got straight into the process of it all and started to get fascinated by that side of things. And then that led into me in a few years' time becoming a captain of my team, so having a different leadership role. And again, it all relates to talking to people, building relationships, and trying to get the best out of other people. And I find that quite satisfying more than my own success.
And from a teaching perspective now, how do you think those two worlds, how do they correlate? Because I can obviously address to my own experience from doing both sides, and I think there's massive amounts of crossover. What have you found to be the biggest kind of wins and strengths that you can take from one into the other?
Well, both environments in a secondary school, well, in teaching and also in coaching, they require high expectations, real clear boundaries and clear routines for me. And as I've mentioned already, being relatable, trying to give people a sense of belonging, and ensuring that they feel safe in that environment. And I think if you've got that in both of those areas, then you're on the right lines.
And it doesn't matter in terms of the age of the people that you're working with. Do you think those skills are transferable regardless?
Yeah, and I think there's different challenges with different ages, and there's different challenges between kind of players and also students. In my context, for example, I've got players there because they want to be there. I'm not paying them to be there. And students are there whether they like it or not, aren't they? Yeah. So there's difference in terms of like motivation and bringing people along with your journey. But there's parallels with regards to the learning cycle with the feedback loops. And I think when I'm watching rugby coaches, we spoke about this just briefly before we came on about kind of ex-players coming into coaching. Sometimes when I watch other coaches, I have my teaching hat on, and I think if I was observing this like I was observing a lesson, there's some little things that I think could really help in terms of your delivery and your feedback and your questioning in order to improve that just small section of your training session. So it certainly helps me and makes me feel more confident when I'm delivering those sessions.
It's one thing I want to kind of pick up on this then, because I think it's one thing the RFU does exceptionally well, and I'm curious if you have one. Do you have a coach, mentor, or someone that you work with that will come and observe you coach? Unofficially,
yeah. I don't do a lot of work with the RFU, to be honest, and I find a lot of my learning comes from things like this, just talking to people. I go off and I spent 2 or 3 pre-seasons with Nottingham Rugby, and I was lucky enough to spend pre-season with them, and they were so good to me and just let me get involved in their team meetings, in their circles, and just being a fly on the wall. And that for me is better than any kind of official, I don't want to talk bad of the RFU obviously, but any official certification or qualification is just getting in them environments. A couple of weeks ago, we had a week off, so I went to Gresley Rovers Football Club just down the road, spent some time with them, and that was fantastic again. I went to Chasetown Football Club, spent some time with them, and then luckily Gary Bowyer, head coach of Burton Albion, got in touch, and we were just chatting about being a Burtonian and what it means to be from Burton, and he invited me over to their game against Blackpool, and again I was in the environment there, and that is where I get my learning, and that's where I feel like I grow.
Yeah, it's really interesting to take that, because I always think the crossover between teachers and then coaches, but obviously teachers, it's one of those things, I don't know if you find this, that sometimes professional development is forced upon you, and there's certain things we have to do. But when you transition into a sports environment, when you're a coach, you get to so far along in that journey, but then where'd you go? Where's the next professional development? Where's the mentor? Where's someone you can lean on or go and observe, or what do you do to get better? And I find that kind of insightful. Like what you've just said is that it's the doing, it's the observation, it's being or taking control of your own professional development or growth, as it were, and picking and choosing those parts to go and observe and go and watch and go and learn from. So I find that really insightful.
I think you've also got to be a person, haven't you? Because I look at a lot of coaches and a lot of teachers, and not that they think they're the finished article, but I don't think a lot of them will look to grow outside. I think they're happy with where they're at, and that's okay, and that's fine. Yeah, in teaching, it is. You don't have a choice sometimes. You've got your CPD session after school that you've got to go to, and I'm really lucky that the guys who run the teaching and learning CPDs at my school, they make it really fun and really engaging. Genuinely, they do. And off the back of that, then I sought out to do a master's in teaching. I listen to podcasts, and I think certain people will try and find ways to improve out of that environment, whereas some people don't want to, and that's fine. So it's not. I don't think it's just forced upon you. I think it depends on the type of person you are. If you want to go out and visibly improve yourself.
Definitely. I suppose it's the equivalent of going to look in someone else's classroom, really, at the end of the day, isn't it?
Yeah. And a lot of teachers say that, don't they? They say if there's one thing, obviously we'd all want a bit more time, but if there's one thing we'd like to do, it's just to go and have a look in it. How does a teacher I teach PE, so how does a teacher in science do it? How does a maths teacher do it? And with all their different environments, bits of equipment, their routines, that's where your learning takes place for me.
Yeah, definitely. Is there anything along the journey that you would say that surprised you?
In teaching or coaching? Both
together.
For my difficulty, and the thing that surprises me is maybe it doesn't surprise you, but you do take a lot home in your head. And I speak to a lot of teachers, even just this week, and I find myself saying to them, look, just switch off now, and enjoy your Christmas and enjoy time with your family. And there's only so much you can do as a coach and also a teacher, and your players and your coaches have got to do a little bit of work at the same time. Now, of course, you can try and build that environment and that motivation for them to, like we've just said, some teachers will go and sort out their own CPD and their own development, and the school has obviously given me that motivation and environment. My job is to make sure that my players and my students are inquisitive and want to learn more and go and do the extra things to go further. So the one thing that surprised me, maybe going into teaching at first and also coaching, is that it's a 24/7 thing in here. Whether you like it or not, you're lying in bed and you're thinking about things all the time. And I don't mind that. Sometimes it's healthy, sometimes it's not.
Yeah, it's the hardest thing I find. Like, if you've had good days versus if you've had them bad days. And I found, I think when I was coaching, it was like, it's how to then switch between the hats, but it's the emotion it takes out of you. Like, and the emotion you have to then bring to certain areas of that. I find it was draining at times. I mean, we talk about balance, we talk about energy, and we talk in there about where do you place your attention. How do you manage then, because you said you were busy, like what is my teacher's hat versus then what is the rugby hat? And we know there's going to be crossover, but how do you just go about just switching in terms of, okay, I'm working with students now, I can say certain words versus, right, I'm working with adults now, I say certain words. How do you go about changing that?
My biggest, if someone was to ask me that question in terms of what would be your biggest advice, and it genuinely would be just to be yourself. And of course, from a coaching world, I would love to be a successful coach, and I would love to be a really inspirational teacher. And you look at the teachers who you remember as a student, or the coaches who you look up to. You can't pretend to be them. You've just got to be yourself. And you know, I'm really proud of my role at Burton Rugby Club, and Burton Rugby Club has been my club growing up as a kid, and to be in the position that I am now is super privileged, and I'm desperate to be successful, and I know that roles like this, they don't always end well. You know, I either finish on a high or they get rid of me and get someone better, and when we're not doing well. So I'm aware of that, but as long as I can say that I've been myself and I've done it my way, then I can't have any arguments with that. And that's the same with teaching. So when I walk into the classroom or I'm walking around the corridors, I'm just being myself. And going back to your previous question about what surprises you the most, you will, and I do, and I'll happily admit it, make mistakes every single day. And every single conversation that I have with parents, with students, with colleagues, with players, constantly reflecting on what's just on the event that's just happened, and how I could deliver it better. And so maybe it's not a mistake, but you're always looking for improvements. But mistakes also do happen every single day. And I know today already when we get onto the coach, or we're meeting the players for breakfast in an hour's time, what's my energy around the players? How am I talking to them? And what am I like on the coach journey up? Am I being reserved? Am I out the way? You're constantly reflecting, and you make mistakes all the time, and that's okay.
Yeah, definitely. That's where the learning takes place. But it's interesting you've said something there about being out of the way. How have you found transitioning then from what is a player into a coach, and allowing the players the space to grow themselves, to lead themselves, whereas when previously you would have been in the mix, you would have been that huddle? Like, how have you found that transition?
Yeah, that was tough from a coaching perspective. Definitely, I went from being a club captain to then a player with a leadership role, and then very quickly through injury, kind of took over as coach, and then kind of officially as then head coach. And you're coaching a lot of the lads who you've played with, and you're coaching a lot of lads who are real good friends as well. And I remember talking to a coach just as I was transitioning over, and he said one of the main things he said is, don't mention that word friends, because of course people know that you've got friends in there, but then some other players will be like, well, are we not friends? Are we not friends then if you're friends with them? So it's keeping, but I'm really lucky as well that the lads that we've got at the club are respectful, and they understand that the role that I've got is a type of position, and they're really good with that. But again, it was just being me, and I thought long and hard about how do I go about it. What do my behaviours look like? Am I going to be this type of head coach? Am I going to be this type of head coach? I've just got to go and be me. And you know what? If it doesn't work in the first season, then that's me. I'm not pretending to be anybody else. So I would respect them, and I show those behaviours that I would like my team to show. And I always like the team to see how much it means to me as a coach. And I'm not playing my violin by saying that I want them to know how hard I work, but if they can see the passion and the energy that I have for it, then I'm sure that will then rub off on them. And it doesn't matter who you are, how old you are, or how young you are, they'll respect that, and they'll go out there and do their best just like you do.
If you're a tutor or coach, you probably didn't get into this work for the admin. Chasing messages, juggling time zones, double checking calendars, and keeping track of invoices can quietly take over your week. Now, that's why I built Duxa. And Duxa is a simple platform designed for tutors and coaches to manage students, schedule sessions, handle reminders, and keep everything organized in one place without the chaos. It's built by me for educators, and there's a free version you can start using straight away. Head to duxa.app and try it out for yourself. Yeah. Thinking about environments now, just as we shift over on this, and it's something you've mentioned frequently about it, and there is obviously the crossover. Thinking about places of learning, because obviously from a rugby side and then into the classroom side, that's what we want to happen. What do you think makes a place of learning?
Well, psychological safety is something that I'm quite big on in the classroom and also on the rugby field. And if you can, I look back at so when I'm teaching like a GCSE lesson, for example, I'm in a classroom compared to on the rugby field. If you can create a space where players and students feel safe, they feel a sense of belonging to that space. They're happy, and this is important, they're happy to make mistakes and they're not afraid to make mistakes. That is a space for me where learning can really happen and accelerate. You want that space to be so safe that players and students are also being inquisitive and asking questions. And that's when I know, in my opinion, that I'm getting it right. When my players are asking questions, when my students are asking questions, when it's player-led or student-led. So I know in teaching we have our routines in the classroom. I know we do at school, and I like that entry routine. You have your starter task. And I mean, if I can get to a position where, and in some classes we do, where my students are coming in, they're getting their iPads open, they're starting the work without me even giving a prompt. That's the environment. They feel safe. They know what's happening. There's less extraneous distractions or noise around. They just come in and they get on with it, and they're being really inquisitive. So it's having that psychological safety. It's the same on the rugby field, and it's the same in the classroom. And we talk about like cold calling, for example, in the classroom, and it's the same with coaching. I try and bring that into the coaching world. Ask a question, give the group some thinking time. There's a high proportion of people thinking about the question that you've just asked. You're picking on somebody for an answer. They feel comfortable to give their full opinion, an honest opinion on what they think that answer is, and they're comfortable to know that they could get it wrong. And if they do get it wrong, there's nobody in that circle or in that classroom who's going to laugh at them or, put them down. Instead, it's a point where we can start to develop and learn. And that for me is an area of learning. And I spoke to a colleague at work last week who's not a teacher, he's more of a mentor. And we spoke about this psychological safety and also how you deliver certain messages to people and build that connection, gives them that sense of trust in you, and that's super important.
So how, if you could give us an example, because we hear this a lot, right? But the question that follows that is always, well, how do we go about building that? Because obviously how it looks, we're going to assume that how it looks in rugby, it looks different in schools, but the reality is it doesn't, right? How do you create psychological safety maybe for adults? And you've got teenagers, you've got colts potentially with you that are 18, 19. You've then got adults, fully enough, who are 30, 32, and there's a disparity between them. How do you create that when there's such a range in, age groups and priorities and even just sort of mentality?
I've got a 39-year-old as well.
Oh, wow. Yeah. Who's that you've got?
Flair Griffiths,
okay.
Who's Nuneaton, Starbridge.
39.
He's
living the dream.
Well. He's doing well. So even people like him with Taff, we can. The important thing for me is being really explicit, and it's not trying to do it discreetly. It's saying to your students and saying to your players, look, this is what I'm going to do. This is what it's going to look like, and this is going to be the benefit. And so, in the classroom, saying to and it's not something that can just happen in one lesson or in one coaching session. It's something that you build over time, and building that trust. And so you're saying to your players, this is and your students, this is how I'm going to ask questions. I'm going to give you some thinking time. I am then going to ask one of you to provide an answer. The reason why we're doing this is because of this. And I think it's always about context. And I had a conversation with the coach at Burton this week. He's saying what I would like us to get to is when we're delivering a session, I don't care if it's just one of your basic handling drills, catch pass drills. Why are we doing it? Put some context on it. Don't just put the cones out, blow your whistle, and off you go. What players and students, it doesn't matter what age. I think we all think of, well, what's in it for me? Why am I doing this? And if you can put some context on it, then they buy into it, and then therefore they're motivated to join in with that process.
And going through that and still focusing now on the environment, is there anything that you would look to sort of actively remove from the environment?
I would just keep things super clear and precise and deliberate. Sometimes it can be, you can go too far with that. I'm awful with coloured cones and spacing, making it look really smart and nice, but I think that's important as well. Yeah. So again, imagine if you're trying to get your players to be in certain spots, but all your cones are miscoloured, and they're straight away, whilst you're trying to give them some context, they're trying to scan the area and thinking, well, hold on a minute, what's his role, what's his responsibility, what am I doing here? And it's the same in the classroom, isn't it? So the selective attention, taking away any extraneous distractions, and making them focus on exactly what you want them to focus on. And sometimes you can go pretty far with that and make it a little bit too obvious, can't you? And spend too much time with it. But definitely just being really deliberate and precise with everything that you do.
So let's think about this now, just focusing in on the rugby side of things. But we're going to address it from one of those things that we're fully aware of in teaching, which is about curriculum. Now, when you come to coach and you're planning out, maybe it's pre-season, you're getting into maybe a kind of where your pockets, your quarter ones, quarter twos are. There's no curriculum for you to focus on here. But we want the learning and the development obviously to be relentless. We want it to be consistent. We want it to show development and improvement. How do you go about building, for what is, want of a better word, a scheme of work or a curriculum for training at rugby?
So one thing, it's difficult at our level, firstly, because they're not professional athletes. Unlike being in a school, they're not there every week and every day. Players might miss a week because they're on holiday or they're ill or they're working. So I'm aware that some players might miss a chunk of training or learning, if that's if we call it that. For me, what we do in that environment is, we've done it the last couple of pre-seasons, is we make a story out of it, and we try and bring that to life by everything that we do. We're using the same terminology, and we're using the same terminology. So, for example, this pre-season we use the story of the storm is coming. And so the first block of training, and you can, if you're to take it to a teaching example, it's like the learning journey through year 7, year 8, or through that year, what you're going to be learning. So it wasn't particularly what are we going to be learning, but it's what's our mindset and our attitude going to be like towards this whole process. So the start of it was, the whole thing was the storm is coming. This was a build-up, like a 11, 12-week build-up of pre-season. The first 2-week block was called the clouds are forming. So we made a little picture of clouds forming over the rugby club, and then underneath there was just a few prompts of clear minds. There was just a few little prompts of this is what we want our attitude to be. And then after that, we just kind of rolled into Rolling Thunder. We had 5 different sections. I can't remember off the top of my head. But each and every week, we'd then announce it. So, we're into the next block now. And the storm is gradually just building and building until we got to the first game of the season, and we called it the Surge. And underneath that was, we're now relentless. There's no turning back. We face it full on. And I think that helps engage the players or the learners in that process, and they can see the context and the purpose behind the journey that you're moving through. And even though that was just a pre-season thing, we still try and block out the season, but it's very difficult to of course we'll kind of use our learning cycle and the forgetting curve and revisit certain things throughout the season. It's difficult when players are coming and going, but definitely using a story to bring the players with you. It keeps them engaged, keeps them motivated, and hopefully keeps them on that journey with you.
So here's an interesting one. Obviously in schools, we have mark books, and obviously we play if students hand in pieces of work or performances they do, obviously they get graded, they get this. How do you manage data analysis then from a sports perspective? Is there any crossover, anything that you kind of take from the education side that you've implemented to kind of see where players are at to then where they've got to? Because you're kind of saying, look, we've done pre-season, you mentioned first games, late August, early September. We're now coming to the end of the first block in the Christmas, end of term 1. How do you go about then reflecting on individual players' development and performance?
Yeah, so we've got we do get some data after every game, which is really, really good, and we get too much data for me to know what to do with, if I'm being honest. We use a platform called Frame Sports, and it's AI driven. And it gives us so much data on the game, percentages, ruck speed for individual players, for the squad. And some of that information is really, really good. And I'll be honest, there's some where I don't really know what I'm doing with it. I'm not trained up in that, but it gives the players something to look at. But where I take my experience being a teacher into the changing room, for example, a couple of weeks ago, and this was purposeful to again keep the players focused on what's important and focusing on what's important and focusing on within rather than getting distracted by everything else. And it's not an invention. We called it the performance pad, and it's a journal basically. And so before every game, so last night, for example, I would send out just 3 or 4 questions to players, and I gave each player a small pad I just bought off Amazon with a Burton RFC sticker put onto it. So I'm in my kitchen putting stickers on the book. My wife's thinking, oh my God, here he goes again. And I gave each player a book before this game, and I wanted them to just write down their answers to a few of these questions. And these questions are, what does a good performance look like from me today? How am I going to? How is that going to benefit the team or the game? What's my unique selling point? What's my USP? What's my point of difference as a player? And how can I implement that on a game? And I said to the players that I'm going to send these questions out prior to every single game, and I'm not going to get you to hand it in afterwards, and I'm not going to mark it. I don't want to see it. But what we do try and do in the week is we will have little conversations with players throughout the week and ask them what did you put in your book this week? What was your target? Did you meet it? How did you know that you hit your target? And then also following a game, we will then send out some questions for them to reflect on. And that's our way of keeping players honest, but also focusing on their impact that they've had. Because essentially, if you look at it, every time a player plays a game, it's the same as a student doing an assessment in a classroom. You're being assessed in a way, and I always think of it when we have a game, it's almost like a mini Ofsted for me. People can see what you've been doing on the training field and if it's working or not. So the performance pad, I think, has worked. How do I know that it's worked? Well, I can see that players, without being prompted, are writing things in their book, which is nice to see. I know that some players probably won't use it, and that's okay as well. But I know that there'll be benefits if you do use it. And again, that's the conversation for me and a player to have when we're discussing about their progress. Is like, well, if you're not using this performance pad, which is another kind of tool that you can use, and then maybe you should start using it. And we had a perfect example last week where we played against Derby, so it was a bit of a local game. And they beat us early on in the season, which was a pretty mental game. And we would expect to beat them last week because we're third, they're rock bottom, and they're not on a great vein of form. We are. We got in at half time and it was 12-10 to us, and they had us rattled, to be honest. But the performance pad came into play because without me and the other coaches talking about tactics and you've got to be doing this and why aren't we doing that, it was just brought it straight back into what's important. So what have you written in your book? What's your point of difference as a player? What is it that you are the best at? Are you a chop tackler? Are you a ball carrier? Are you a line out master? Are you a scrummager? Whatever your thing is, and what you've written in your book, you go out and do that in the second half. And if everybody does that, we'll be fine. And we got out. I'm not saying that was the winning speech by any means, but it brought a bit more focus back to what we're actually trying to achieve as a player. And we ended up winning quite comfortably in the end. But it also keeps them engaged and focused during a game because on average we get about 30 minutes ball in play time. And out of an 80-minute game, there's a lot of thinking time there where the ball's out of play or they're setting up a scrum or a line out. And there's times there where you can get distracted and run away with yourself. And that's how I reflected as a player. So my mind would be running crazy. I'd be looking at the size of their number 8 thinking, oh my God, he's going to be running into me in a minute. But I want my players to just revert back to what they put in their book and what is it that they're trying to get out of today's game. And if everybody can do that, then I'm sure that we'll be those 1%ers, isn't it? We can be a little bit successful. So going back to your question, I think that's what I'm trying to take into the changing rooms. And players can see that at times that I'm trying different things out. And sometimes things work and sometimes things don't. And I'm happy when things don't work because I'm just being me and I'm trying things out.
It's great. Give us an example then, like something that hasn't worked and how you kind of approach that and reflect upon it.
A similar one. We had a cup game away from home, and I gave everyone a plastic ant I bought, and I've still got them knocking about the house. I bought like 500 plastic ants off Amazon. And I gave each player on the coach just this tiny ant. I said, put your hand out, put this ant on their hand. I just said, just keep hold of that and we'll talk about it when we get to the changing rooms. And I could hear the lads on the back of the bus, oh, what is this? Is it a spider? Is it an ant? And I liked the fact that they were being curious and they were taking the mick out of it as well, which is good. And we got into the changing rooms and I knew because it was a game where it was a bit of a banana skin for us. I wrote on the board the word ant, A-N-T, and it was about automatic negative thoughts. And that during the game, and again, during those downtimes in the game, if it's only a 30-minute ball in play time, it's natural for us for these automatic negative thoughts to come into our thought process when we're playing, whether it's doubt in yourself, whether it's doubt in your systems and your tactics. And it was just trying to encourage the players to to focus again. We didn't have the performance pads back then, but I think that would tie in nicely. Is think about what you are really good at. Don't worry about what you're not so good at. Think about what you are. And I just wanted them to be really confident and positive. And I don't think that worked. I think I needed to deliver it in a different way. But I think the whole ant thing, I don't know. I think some of the players are like, oh, come on, get out of it. Let's just get out there and play. So maybe it wasn't the right game. Maybe it wasn't the right time. Maybe it was just a little bit too much, too much kind of psychological, too much of a psychological message for them. But again, I'm happy that it didn't work, because as always, you reflect on it and try and understand why it didn't work. And maybe it was in my delivery. Maybe it was the wrong choice of game to do it. But I enjoyed it nonetheless. I'm still finding them about the house.
Did you win the game?
We did. We did, and it wasn't. I think one of the reasons why I don't think that whole process worked is because it wasn't. The game didn't go how we wanted it to, and no games do really, do they? But I just thought maybe I gave them too much to think about, and which is why I'm enjoying this process with the performance pads, because it keeps it really focused. And for the lads, I think one of the most important things is this isn't really a word, but it makes us less rattleable. So, for example, Derby last week, we knew that they would try and come and get under our skin and frustrate us and get us rattled, and having that performance pad and focusing on what your goal is for the game, what your point of difference is. They can try and get under your skin if you want, but this is what I'm staying focused on, because I've got a process that I need to hit today. And we did that in the second half. We didn't in the first half. So I know that this performance pad is working, and I think we can keep developing that. Definitely.
And we're going to shift a little bit now and kind of explore your leadership and this almost the psychology side of things, if that's okay. Obviously, you talk a lot about it from a psychology. You talk a lot about performance and obviously the desire to bring people together. And if you look across sort of the both worlds that you live in here, I'm curious from your side what you find most difficult. Is it a case of standing in front of the teenagers who don't want to learn, or is it more harder to stand in front of the group of rugby players who desperately want to win?
Definitely, for me, it's standing in front of the players who want to win. And the reason for that is I find maybe it's just my skill set and what I enjoy. I enjoy, I don't like to use the term going down to their level, but if you've got a student who's not motivated and doesn't want to learn, I enjoy that challenge of getting onto their level and bringing them up to my level and increasing their motivation and using certain techniques to, and we've spoken about that psychological safety, building their motivation and their trust in you and bringing them on the journey with you. I enjoy that. When you've got a player who desperately wants to win, I think the danger of that is that their mistakes are then magnified, and I use the word danger because although mistakes are okay, I know by knowing my players at the rugby club that they don't handle those mistakes very well, and that sometimes when they're in a position of pressure, although I try and say to them that pressure is a privilege, and putting yourselves in those situations is a really positive thing. Some players are also best when they're just relaxed and there is no pressure. Some of the players thrive on pressure, so it's finding the right balance. But imagine trying to bring a player down and say to them, which we try and do, it's like, well, how important is winning? When that's what you're trying to go and do. Ultimately, we want to go and win, but is it that important in the bigger picture? So, for an example, we played against Derby early on in the season. We were 26 points ahead at half time and we lost. It was a disaster.
To lose.
Yeah. away from home against, it was a local derby, big crowd. It was a horrible afternoon. And one of our messages is always don't get too high on the wins and don't get too low on the losses. And that's very difficult to not get too low in a huddle 5 minutes after the full-time whistle when it's raw for the players who have been there and put the body on the line. And trying to say to the lads at that point that this result is probably the best thing that's going to happen to us this season. And that's really hard for players to understand. And I don't blame them either. If I was a player, I'd be like, whoa, hold on a minute. Like, we have just thrown away a massive lead. This is embarrassing. This is not like us. It's not who we are. But looking at the bigger picture, it was probably the best the best bit of learning for us. And again, that message that we say to the lads, that we don't lose, we learn. So it's important to know that losing is also okay, and we can learn a lot from that. Winning isn't the absolute be all and end all. And I can already picture some players who might be listening to this going, "No, you're absolutely wrong, Gaffer. It's all about winning." And that's okay as well. So I prefer the challenge of, I prefer both challenges, but I think what's easier for me is to bring a demotivated student or student with no motivation and try and bring them along the journey with us, rather than try and just hold back a player who's got such high expectations and kind of magnifies every error and mistake that happens to them.
Kind of building on that, and you mentioned this earlier about success, and we can focus a little bit on the learning side of things as well. If we take away the scoreboard, how would you measure success? Yeah,
this is a lot. Some of the old boys will ask you this in the bar, and that how I measure my success as my role as a director of rugby is, how many players do we get to training? How many players do we get available for games? And how many players do we have at our socials? Because ultimately that's what we're about. We're a big family, and we all come together. And if we've got a high engagement there, then the league table really doesn't matter ultimately. And if we've got a high engagement there, that's when I know that we're being successful, because we want to create an environment that people want to be a part of. And if we've got people who are coming to training, and we've got people who are available, and we've got people going to socials, then we know that we're on the right lines there. Another measurement of success is, can I make myself redundant in this situation? How much of what we do is player led? And I love it when players, even little things like a fine system for the lads, or we had a situation the other night where one of the players, who is also a teacher, but he's a player as well. He just wanted to do one of our kind of player primers at the start of the session. He just had an idea that he wanted to do, and then we ended up having a game of tug of war. And this was 5 minutes before we started training. So again, I'm thinking in my head, just adjust the timings a little bit. How does that fit into this? Yeah, go for it, because you've got your players turning up to training who are happy to deliver some of the session, and that's when you know you've got a good environment, because they're motivated to be a part of that and contribute to it. Now, I'm not saying that because we've got all of that at Burton Rugby Club. We haven't. We're still not as successful as I'd like to be in terms of availability for training and games and socials. And there's a lot to add to that. Obviously, the modern day person and rugby player and expectations. But that for me is how I measure our success.
And looking ahead then, and thinking about how things change and how things evolve, if, let's say, we've got this crossover and we can say that learning can happen everywhere, it can happen on the pitch, it can happen in the changing room, in the bar, the same as it does in the classrooms, in the corridors, in the hallways. What do you think, looking ahead, that leaders, directors of sport, directors of rugby, what do you think leaders need to understand now that they probably didn't 10 years ago?
I would go back. I would go back again to the psychological safety. Kind of before the pandemic, I was a new teacher, or well, I'm still a new teacher. We're always learning, but I think from I can speak more from a coaching perspective, I think, and in the rugby environment, because I've been a player and I've been a leader with different hats on for a long time. I think more so now, players, for them, their initial thought is, what's in it for me? And if you're not offering them cash, which is great if you're not, and we don't, which is where we want to be. Players need to know what's in it for me. Is it enjoyment? Am I going to get some enjoyment out of it? Am I going to develop? Am I going to learn? And I think that's one of the biggest differences now is learning how not necessarily a new generation, because I don't want to sound like I'm old, but definitely students and students are the same. What's in it for me? Why are we doing this? Why have you got us to do this task? So it's just making sure that there's context to absolutely everything that you do, so students can see the value and the worth in it and the bigger picture. And I think from observation, there's some coaches and teachers who miss out on that. That's not to be disrespectful, because a lot of their energy is put into delivering the actual drill, and I don't like that word, but delivering the activity or whatever it might be. But there's so much importance in putting some context in it and what's in it for me. And I always try and think about that just before I deliver something to either the students or the players. Is like, this is important because this is why we're doing this. And because you're going to benefit in these ways. And straight away, I think you're grabbing their attention and you're increasing their motivation. So I probably haven't answered your question in terms of the difference from a decade, but for me, people coming into coaching or teaching, that would be one of the most important things.
Yeah, definitely. And you're right in what you say in terms of it's a constantly changing thing, right? In terms of leaders, whether it's the height or to the very bottom part, whether it's rugby, sports, school, no one is the finished article, I think. And if that's a key thing that people can come in with and understand that and be more introspective, then it allows the room for growth. And that's definitely a key thing. I think I'm seeing the shift in leaders now that are more like that. They seem softer. More people try to understand the individual, try to allow the individual to grow, give them space to grow. And that kind of, for me, echoes what you said about being player-led. And we talk about student agency a lot in the classrooms. We want them to be able to make their own decisions and solve their own problems, not constantly looking to me to do that for them. And that sounds very much like something I've picked up a lot of what you've said in terms of how you coach, probably how you teach as well, is that we want that agency.
Well, you mentioned the word being softer. Now, I think that's also important because let's just take a teaching example or an example in education. You know, you can be authoritative and you can be strict or authoritative, however you want to put it. But I've found a lot of success in following that softer approach. And again, the context around it. So let's just take an example of, I'm ahead of year as well, so dealing with a lot of behaviour and things, which is super enjoyable and super challenging as well. Imagine you're a student and I don't know, you've not chosen wisely and you've made a mistake. Let's just say you're being put in a detention or you're being externally suspended for a few days or whatever it might be. How you deliver that message to that person is so important. And if you just slap them round the face with this detention, like, that's it, off you go, that's your room, you're going in for the rest of the day, you're going to sit in that cubicle on your own, off you go, then you're probably going to be met with some conflict and argument and misunderstanding, and rightly so. And this goes back to what I said about like students and also players. It's like they want to know some context around this and why and what's in it for me. I've found success in and I've delivered some pretty harsh messages to students with regards to their behaviour, but delivering it and be soft and try and get them to understand that. Can you understand why the choice that you made there isn't acceptable in this environment? And get them to understand, and you can see them start to buy into what you're trying to say. Then you deliver that message of, as a result of that, you are going to spend 2 days in reflection or whatever it might be. And then you're kind of keeping your fingers crossed, playing, please don't kick off here, please don't kick off here. And they can like, yeah, all right, well, I don't want to go to reflection, or I don't want my detention, but yeah, they can appreciate that you've delivered that message to them respectfully, rather than just throwing it straight at them and saying, go on, out you go, I don't want to see you. So having that softer approach and building those relationships, again, in teaching or in coaching, people will then come with you on your journey as a leader, and it's something I've found to be successful.
How do you find it, though, from delivering this to adults? Because obviously we've mentioned, and we know that they're there through choice. They want to be there. But I can only reflect on my own. You know, people listen to this might be like, but like there are certain values that I held like really important to me, like timekeeping, like punctuality for me. Like, and I say to kids all through school is that, you know, early is on time is late. And that's kind of how I view it. Like, session start. How do you go about, I don't want to say disciplining, but how do you go about talking to adults when their behaviors or their choices haven't met those expectations?
Well, again, it's having clear boundaries. So it's not an opinion thing. This is what we set out at the start, and having that conversation with them and saying that this is what we set out at the start. We all agreed to this, and we know that this is where we need to be if we want to be successful. We know that this is what good practice looks like. You can see now that with your behaviour, I know you didn't turn up on time, you didn't have the right kit or whatever. This isn't in line with what we're trying to do. So it's not an opinion thing. This is what we agreed on. But again, it's how you deliver that message. We've got a lot of players who are very passionate and very, they wear their heart on their sleeves, and sometimes it's just the way that your tone of voice. And my players yawn at me when I use the word energy, because I talk about, and I don't mean energy in terms of you've had a can of Monster and you're bouncing off the walls. It's just, what's your body language like when you walk into a room? What's your posture? What's your tone of voice like? And your facial expressions. That's the energy that you're giving off to other people. And adults will obviously pick up on that. But so having clear boundaries set out, so it doesn't become an opinion. But also when it does become an opinion, for example, like selection, which as a coaching yourself, you'll know that's such a difficult part of the role. And it's communication, which is super important. Being honest to the players, them understanding that this is a difficult decision, and that this decision hasn't been easy. But I always say to the players that the reason why you're dropped this week, or the reason why you're not playing this week, is because of this. I don't expect you to agree with me, but I expect you to accept it and then go and prove me wrong. And I hope that you do prove me wrong, and then we'll have a conversation about how we can make sure that this conversation doesn't happen again. And I think the players respect, most of them do respect that. And of course, but more often than not, 99% of the time, players will respect that you're being honest with them, and you have to be honest right from the very start, because as soon as you start to weave your way around it, the adults they'll see a weakness in that, and owning those mistakes as a coach is that it's just my opinion, and I could get it wrong, and if I get it wrong, then I'll own it, and we'll work together to make sure that we don't make that mistake again.
Selection for me, I always disliked it. It was always the longest part of after a session, and having to justify as well, and then having to go through and deliver this message. And for me, I mean, we're 10 years in Dubai now, so this was like 10, 11 years ago having to do it in the UK, and it was difficult. It was difficult then. I don't think it ever gets easier. I think the things that have changed for me is just the amount of, not research, but information that's come out. Like, we talk about psychological safety, we talk about building trust, we talk about, like, being honest doesn't have to be kind. It can be transparent. And like, I love the work of Jefferson Fisher. He talks about this, about the next conversation. And he talks a lot about framing conversations. So if you're going to have a difficult conversation, you can just start off and go, hey, this is going to be a difficult conversation. And you're going to disagree with some of the things I might say. And that's okay. I just need you to understand. And that, as a head of year, and I've had to have some real difficult conversations this year, and saying to people, look, and you mentioned it, you kind of said, look, this isn't a negotiation. I am notifying you. Like, that for me has been really, really powerful, because then it sets the kind of the tone of where the direction goes, and people can't then go, no, you were too fluffy. You kind of done, like, no, I've been very transparent and honest with you. So really, really take away a lot from that, which is it's good to hear. Really good to hear.
I agree so much with you on that. I've made those mistakes. A difficult conversation with a parent, and you start for the first couple of minutes and you're just talking about how each other are. And, did you have a nice weekend? Yeah, fantastic. I'm thinking, oh mate, I've got to deliver such a harsh message, but I've not framed it right. And just going back to what you were saying again, those difficult conversations. One thing that I'm trying to do more, and the biggest learning for me, is do the hardest thing first. Yeah. And if you keep putting those difficult conversations off throughout the day or throughout the week, that's when your role starts to become really challenging. Get that difficult conversation done first. Do a good job and be honest. Be honest with it and give it the respect it deserves, and then everything else will be a lot easier.
Yeah. Completely, 100% agree with that one. I'm going to wrap this up. Obviously, time is ticking on. You've got places to be, important things to do today. But I have one last question for you. So we're going to think years from now, and you've got students that are now maybe adults, and you've got rugby players that have potentially retired. What would you like them to say about you, and what do you hope they say that you gave them?
Yeah, good question. Well, I look back at some of my coaches, and again, I don't look back on. I'll use an example. Chris Davis, who coached me when I was at Hartbury, he does a lot of work in the Sevens circuit now, and I think he just started working with Poland, and he's all around the world. He's been in Dubai as well. Why is he a coach that stands out to me? I don't think we were that successful under him in terms of our win ratio, and I don't particularly remember any games where we won and we were celebrating. But what I do remember is how much it meant to him for me to enjoy what I was doing, and I would love for people to, as you were saying, in years to come, it doesn't matter about winning and being successful, but if they were to say, oh yeah, it meant a lot to him, and he did, he made it feel really special for us, then that's great. He's given people great experiences, and I suppose that ties into the very first question you asked at the start of this is what's the one sentence behind closed doors, and it's just giving people the tools to go and express themselves and learn and get better, and that would be the same for students as well. You look back on some of your teachers, don't you? And I don't know, maybe I didn't learn anything with them, but I had a really good time. so that's that.
Yeah, I got some people like that I can think of as well. So now, Harry, it's been an absolute pleasure, an absolute treat as well to start this sort of crossover between sports performance and education, and see how you're managing it and how you're growing and developing as a practitioner across both of these. So really, really appreciate you taking the time early for you this morning as well to share this with us. So thank you ever so much.
Thanks, Alex. I enjoyed that. Forgot I was off camera for a lot of that. That's how involved we were in it.
It was grand. Well, you take care and all the best this Saturday.
Thank you.